The Silent Heir, Part 1, The Return. The funeral. The rain fell in thin, relentless sheets, slicking the polished marble steps of St. Matthew's Cathedral. Isabella Caldwell paused at the base of the staircase, her black umbrella trembling slightly in her hand. She stared up at the looming structure where her father's funeral was being held, her breath catching as though the sheer weight of the moment pressed against her chest. Richard Caldwell was dead. The titan of Caldwell Industries, a man who had built an empire from nothing, a man whose approval she had chased like sunlight, was gone. Her leather heels slipped slightly on the wet stone as she climbed. She wasn't used to heels. In Paris she wore flats, practical shoes for practical living. But Paris felt a world away. Today, she had been thrust back into a theater where she was destined, as always, to play a minor role. The cathedral doors opened, spilling golden light onto the rain-soaked morning. Inside, the murmur of voices swelled. Heads turned as Isabella entered. A ripple of whispers followed her, traveling pew to pew, like a breeze rustling leaves. That's Isabella. She hasn't been home in years. Poor thing, he never favored her. Michael's sister. Well, half-sister. Isabella kept her head bowed, cheeks warm with the weight of their curiosity. She slid into a pew near the back. Her black dress was plain, unadorned, without the subtle flourish of wealth the other women carried like perfume. She looked like what she had always been in this family, an afterthought. And then she saw him, Michael. He stood near the altar, tall and magnetic in his tailored black suit, shaking hands with senators, CEOs, and ambassadors, as though the cathedral were another boardroom. His golden hair gleamed beneath the stained glass light, his smile practiced, devastating, the kind that promised allegiance and swallowed rivals. He caught sight of her, across the crowd. For an instant, his blue eyes hardened before he slipped his mask back on, charming the next guest in line. Michael Caldwell, the favored son, the heir apparent, the boy who had learned early how to turn their father's affection into currency. The organ groaned, and the service began. Isabella bowed her head, though her eyes drifted to the casket draped in white lilies. Richard Caldwell looked untouchable, even in death. He had been a god to her, a god she could never please. She remembered standing as a child in the hallway of the mansion, her little hands holding up a crayon drawing of a house. "That's very nice, Isabella," he had murmured absently, already turning to Michael, who had come rushing in with a toy airplane. Richard's face had lit up then, all warmth and pride. "Look at that, son. Someday you'll fly real ones." The memory seared her as the priest droned on about legacy and eternity. She could almost hear the whispered comparisons echoing down the years. Michael, clever and daring. Isabella, too shy, too quiet. Michael, who learned to negotiate deals before he was 15. Isabella, who liked to read in the garden. Michael, who would follow the footsteps of their father. Isabella, who would just be average. Just an average girl. When the service ended, the mourners filed past her father's coffin. Some touched the polished mahogany. Others bowed their heads. Isabella lingered, waiting until most of the crowd had gone. Then she stepped forward, her hand trembling as she brushed the cool wood. Her voice was a whisper meant for him alone. "Goodbye, Father." The words tasted bitter, not from grief, but from years of silence, of letters unanswered, of calls that never came, of birthdays forgotten. Even in death, he felt distant, unreachable. She turned and found Michael watching her. He approached, his footsteps, deliberate, echoing in the vaulted cathedral. His hand came to rest lightly on her shoulder. To the outside eye, it looked fraternal, comforting. To Isabella, it felt like possession. "You came," he said smoothly, his voice low, intimate, as though they were co-conspirators instead of rivals bound by blood. "I wasn't sure you would." "I had to," she murmured. "He was my father, too." Michael's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "Yes," he said softly, "he was." Then he released her, his hand falling away as he turned to greet another guest, leaving Isabella standing alone in the shadows of the cathedral, the rain still pounding against the stained glass. The whispers resumed as she walked down the aisle to the exit. She caught fragments. "Forgotten daughter. Left nothing for her. Michael will take everything," until the words clung to her like damp clothing. She pressed her lips together, trying to ignore the sting. She was used to it, wasn't she? Used to being invisible. But something inside her whispered that this time, this homecoming, would not end with her fading quietly into the background. As she stepped outside into the rain, the bells tolled, solemn and heavy. Isabella raised her umbrella, her gaze lingering on the black hearse waiting to carry her father away. She felt like a ghost in her own family, yet unaware that the role she had played all her life, the timid, overlooked daughter, was about to shift, that the story was only beginning. The will. The air in the conference room felt heavy, as though the walls themselves were mourning the man whose name was carved into the building's facade. The long mahogany table gleamed under the muted light, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs filled with expectant faces. Outside, New York's skyline pressed against the windows, indifferent to grief, indifferent to legacy. Isabella Caldwell sat at the far end, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had chosen a black dress that felt too plain compared to the polished ensembles around her. She could feel eyes on her, polite, assessing, dismissive. She had grown used to it. After all, hadn't she been invisible most of her life? At the head of the table, Michael reclined with the ease of a man already certain of victory. His tailored suit whispered money. His smile whispered entitlement. He glanced at Isabella once, the corner of his mouth curving in faint amusement. It was the smile he had used since childhood, whenever he wanted to remind her she was second best. The family lawyer, Mr. Langley, shuffled papers with a solemnity that bordered on theatrical. He cleared his throat. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Richard Caldwell." The room hushed. The name itself carried weight. Richard Caldwell, industrialist, empire builder, a man whose fortune had touched every corner of the globe. Now his legacy was about to be divided. Michael leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Shall we begin? Langley nodded and began. I, Richard Allen Caldwell, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. The words rolled out in practiced cadence, legal phrases punctuated by bequests. Houses, properties, accounts, all meticulously documented, all flowing in one direction. To Michael. To Michael. To Michael. Isabella felt the heat rise in her cheeks with each sentence. She lowered her eyes to the table, the polished wood reflecting her downcast face. She had told herself not to expect anything, and yet some foolish part of her heart had hoped for recognition, for proof that she mattered. Finally, Langley paused, adjusting his spectacles. His voice dropped slightly, as if even he recognized the absurdity of what he was about to say. To my daughter, Isabella Caldwell, I leave 1 share in Caldwell Industries. A ripple of laughter, quickly stifled, moved through the room. Michael did not bother to hide his grin. 1 share? He drawled. Father always did have a sense of humor. Isabella's stomach tightened. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and escape the humiliating spotlight. 1 share. A single, solitary share in a corporation worth billions. It was an insult dressed as a gift, a cruel reminder of her irrelevance. Langley continued, clearing his throat again. And to Isabella, I also leave this. He produced a small velvet box, placing it carefully before her. Inside lay a pocket watch, its silver surface dulled by time. This belonged to your late mother. Mr. Caldwell requested that it remain in your care. Isabella blinked at the object. The room seemed to tilt for a moment. She reached out, hesitant fingers brushing the cool metal. Her mother's watch. She remembered it faintly, a shimmer of memory from childhood, her mother's delicate hands winding it at night, the faint ticking that used to lull her to sleep. Isabella closed the box quickly, as though guarding it from Michael's gaze. Michael laughed, the sound sharp and cutting. A trinket and a token share. Father was generous indeed. Someone at the table tittered. Another shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to meet Isabella's eyes. The humiliation pressed down on her, suffocating. She kept her face lowered, praying no one would see the tears that threatened. Langley finished reading. The remainder of Richard Caldwell's estate, including all corporate holdings, accounts, properties, and personal possessions not otherwise specified, shall pass to his son, Michael Caldwell. Silence hung in the room, heavy and final. It was done. The empire was Michael's. The crumbs, Isabella's. Chairs scraped as people rose, murmurs filling the air. Congratulations to Michael. Whispers of admiration. Isabella remained seated, her hands clutching the velvet box. She could feel Michael's gaze on her, warm with triumph. He sauntered toward her, placing a hand on the back of her chair, leaning down so only she could hear. Don't take it too hard, Izzy. Father always said you weren't cut out for business, but at least you got a keepsake. His eyes flicked to the box. Hold on to it. Sentiment is all you'll ever have. She bit her lip, refusing to look at him. If she met his eyes, he would see the hurt. He had always thrived on it. Michael straightened, adjusting his cufflinks. With a flourish of confidence, he strode out of the room, surrounded by well-wishers. He looked every inch the heir, every inch the conqueror. Isabella sat alone for a long moment after the room emptied. Her fingers, traced the outline of the pocket watch through the velvet. It felt heavier than it should have, as though it carried more than memory. But she dismissed the thought. What could it possibly hold but time long gone? She slipped the box into her purse and rose quietly. The one share, the pocket watch, worthless gifts, laughed at by everyone, especially Michael. She could hear his laughter still ringing in her ears, mocking her like it had all her life. As she walked out of the room, her steps echoed faintly against the marble corridor. The Caldwell name glared down at her from the gilt-framed portraits that lined the walls. Portraits of stern men in tailored suits, men who had commanded industries, dictated markets, and bent entire nations to their will. Men like her father, men like her brother. Never women, never her. She pressed a hand against her chest, feeling the steady tick of the watch through the velvet of her purse. The sound was oddly comforting, though she told herself it was nothing more than a trick of her imagination. Still, the rhythm seemed alive, as though it were keeping time, not only for her, but for something waiting in the shadows of her life. Outside the conference room, voices floated up from the grand staircase. Michael's laughter carried above the rest, rich and confident, the sound of a man already measuring the world against the breadth of his ambition. Isabella froze, her body tense. Instinct, urging her to stay unseen. For as long as she could remember, she had lived in Michael's shadow, a place of safety, but also suffocation. Today had been no different. Humiliation was familiar. It clung to her like perfume. She slipped down a side corridor, away from the voices, toward the quiet of the old library. Her father's presence lingered there most strongly, in the faint scent of leather and tobacco, in the shelves of worn volumes no one else touched. She sank into one of the high-backed chairs and let herself breathe. The watch ticked softly in her purse, an odd reminder that though her father's empire was gone from her grasp, something of her mother remained. Isabella pulled it out, turning it over in her hands. The silver had dulled, but beneath the tarnish, she could see faint engravings, delicate scrollwork, initials that had nearly faded with time. She ran her finger over them, remembering her mother's face, blurred by the haze of years. She had been so young when she lost her. Her mother had been gentle, a rare softness in a world of sharp edges. And now, this watch was all she had left. All you'll ever have, Michael's voice echoed in her mind. She winced. The door creaked open, and she startled. It was only Langley, the lawyer. He stepped inside quietly, his thin frame outlined by the golden afternoon light. "Miss Caldwell," he said gently, "I thought I might find you here." She sat up quickly, embarrassed. I didn't mean to intrude." "It's your home, too," Langley reminded her. Then, after a pause, "I wanted to say, your father's decisions were his own. Do not think it reflects your worth." Isabella gave a small, hollow laugh. "One share in the company. A trinket. It reflects something." Langley's eyes softened. "Sometimes the smallest things carry weight, in ways we do not yet understand. Your father was not a frivolous man." His words puzzled her, but she nodded politely, unwilling to cling to hope. Hope had always been a dangerous indulgence in her family. "Thank you, Mr. Langley," she murmured. When he left, she sat for a long time with the watch in her hand, listening to its steady tick. She wanted to believe Langley's words, wanted to believe that there was meaning behind the scrap she'd been left. But belief was a luxury, and Isabella Caldwell had learned long ago that luxuries were not meant for her. Still, she slipped the watch back into her purse with care, as though protecting a secret she did not yet understand.